The paddle rose. Not for the painting. Not for the wine. For her. Sold. One word. And Maya's entire body went cold. Julian's fingers wrapped around her wrist, not holding her. Owning her. He leaned close, his cologne expensive, his voice a blade wrapped in silk. Smile, he whispered. You're embarrassing me. She smiled. She always smiled. Across the gilded room, a man in a charcoal suit hadn't moved. Hadn't blinked. His paddle was still raised, after the auctioneer had called it. Like he hadn't heard the word sold. Like he didn't accept it. Julian noticed. His grip tightened. The man lowered his paddle slowly. And for one impossible second, across marble floors and crystal chandeliers and 4 years of silence, his eyes found hers. Not the dress. Not the bruise she was hiding under powder and careful angles. Huh. Maya looked away first. She always looked away first. But something in her chest, something she had locked in a box and buried under 4 years of yes, Julian and I'm sorry, Julian, knocked once against its walls. Once was enough. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. Gee, be charming, Julian said in the elevator. His fingers pressed against her throat as he straightened her necklace. Not adjusting it. Reminding her. Yes, Julian. She always said yes. The restaurant was called Aurelius. The kind of place where tablecloths cost more than groceries and conversations disappeared like they'd never happened. Julian had accepted the dinner invitation from Ethan Voss the way he accepted everything. Like it was already his. What Julian didn't know was that Ethan Voss had done his homework. Every shell account. Every redirected wire transfer. Every NDA signed by the 2 household staff members who'd left in 18 months and never spoke publicly again. He knew enough. What the file hadn't told him, what no file could tell him, was the specific quality of her silence. Ethan arrived and didn't rush. Men like him didn't perform urgency. The room adjusted around him the way a current shifts when something large moves beneath the surface. He shook Julian's hand with the warmth of a man who felt exactly none of it, sat down, and picked up the menu. Without looking at Maya. He was looking at everything else. The way her chair was angled so her back faced the room, isolated without a wall. The way her hands stayed in her lap. The way she'd ordered water before Julian could order for her, and then gone completely still when his eyes moved to her glass. Recalculating. Did that cost me something? Julian talked. He always talked. About contracts, connections, the consulting firm expanding into DC. The kind of talking that fills a room so completely no one else has to exist in it. Then his phone buzzed. His expression didn't change for the other diners. But Ethan watched it move through him. A cold front behind the jaw, something shifting beneath the pleasant mask. Maya felt it too. Ethan watched her feel it. Watched her shoulders draw a fraction closer to her ears. Watched her set her fork down, preparing to need both hands for something else. Excuse me, Julian said pleasantly. He stood and moved toward the corridor. The silence he left was a different kind entirely. Ethan set down his menu. Reached for the cloth napkin. Produced a pen, unhurried, like nothing, and wrote 7 digits. He folded it once. Slid it 2 inches across the white tablecloth. Not exactly to her. Just closer. He did not look at her while he did it. Maya stared at the napkin. Then at the corridor. Then at the napkin again. Her face gave away nothing. That extraordinary, terrible composure. But her hand moved. Slowly. She unfolded the edge. Read the numbers once. Then she did something that cracked open a specific, small place in Ethan's chest he hadn't known still had the capacity to crack. She lifted the napkin. She put it in her mouth. Chewed. Swallowed. picked up her water glass and folded her hands back in her lap as Julian returned with his pleasant face reassembled. Ethan picked up his fork. She's been surviving this longer than I understood, he thought. And underneath that, quieter and more dangerous, not much longer. The Alderton contract collapsed on a Tuesday. Ethan's operative sent him one line with the confirmation. He's going to bleed somewhere tonight. By 9 p.m., the private line rang. No words, just breathing, and behind it, the sound of glass breaking. Then nothing. He was in the car before the call disconnected. 11 minutes to the Harcourt townhouse. The doorman made the mistake of stepping into Ethan's path and reconsidered at speed. The elevator opened on the 4th floor to the sound of Julian's voice. Low, controlled, lethal in the specific way quiet men are lethal. Ethan moved toward it without breaking stride. He found her on the kitchen floor in her red silk robe. Julian standing over her, jacket still on. Like this was an errand he was completing before moving on to other things. 2 men near the service entrance. Not staff. Clean up. The plastic sheeting was still folded near the door. Julian. Ethan's voice cut across the room like a door closing. Julian turned. And for one moment the 2 men looked at each other across that pristine, horrible kitchen. The criminal and the gentleman. And everything between them collapsed into something much simpler. This, Ethan said quietly, is the last room you will ever hurt her in. He nodded once at Theo, who was already behind the 2 men near the service door. Then he crossed to Maya, crouched in front of her, and did something he had not planned, not calculated, not permitted himself in 12 years. He put his hand out, palm up, and waited. She looked at his scarred hand. Then his face. I've got you, he said. Nothing else. No performance. No promise he couldn't keep. Just those 3 words in a voice that had stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was. Slowly, with the deliberate care of a woman who had been burned by every door she'd ever opened, Maya placed her hand in his. He helped her up like she was something that mattered. Because she was. She didn't speak on the drive. He didn't ask her to. The estate sat 3 hours outside the city, past Julian's name, his lawyers, his carefully tended network of silence. Stone and iron and windows that let in light without apology. Ethan walked her to the east wing. Her rooms, he said. Same tone he used for logistics. She stopped at the bedroom door. The lock, she said. Her voice was rougher than he expected. Not from the night, from disuse. A voice that had been kept quiet so long it had nearly forgotten its own register. Locks from the inside, he said. Only the inside. You have the only key. She turned the handle. Stepped in. Turned back once. Looked at him across the threshold with an expression he couldn't name. Not gratitude. Not relief. But something older. The expression of someone who had been waiting so long to be somewhere safe that they weren't entirely sure safety was real. She closed the door. He heard the lock turn. He stood in the hallway a long moment, his hand flat against the wall beside her door, and said nothing to the dark. The second night was worse. Ethan was in the corridor at 3 a.m. when the sound came through her door, not a scream, which he could have responded to. Something quieter. More gutting. A voice saying no in the flat, methodical tone of someone who had learned that screaming didn't change outcomes. He sat down against the wall outside her door. He did not knock. Did not call her name. He simply put his back against the wall and stayed, the same way he had once stayed through a very different dark night at 17, when there was no one on the other side of his door. He stayed until the sound stopped. He stayed until he heard her breathing even out through the wood. He was still there when morning came. Jacket folded beside him. Eyes open, watching the light change. When her lock turned just after 7, and the door opened to find him sitting on the floor, Maya looked down at him for a long moment. He looked up. I didn't want to leave, he said. Simply. She considered this. Then she stepped over his legs, walked to the kitchen, and a minute later her voice came from around the corner, rough with sleep and something that was not yet trust, but perhaps the first stone in its foundation. How do you take it? Ethan closed his eyes. Opened them. Black, he said. And for the first time in 4 years, in a house where all the doors locked from the inside, Maya Harcourt made something for someone else and did not calculate the cost. She started asking questions on the 9th day. Not careful questions. Real ones. Direct and slightly unsettling in their precision. The questions of a mind that had been kept in a box for 4 years and was now remembering it had edges. Why do your men never sit with their backs to a door? What did you see at that dinner that I didn't know you were seeing? When someone is lying about money, what moves first? Their hands or their eyes? Ethan set down the contract he was reading. Sit down, he said. I'll show you. He taught her the economics of a lie. How hands stall when the brain is building a story. How the eyes don't dart left or right like films suggest. They go very still. Like a person who's heard something. He gave her his own tells to study. Something he had never given anyone. She absorbed it like she was starving. You were always this smart, he said once, not looking up from the documents. She was quiet for a moment. Julian thought intelligence was a challenge to his authority. Julian was afraid of you. She looked up. Something shifted behind her eyes. Say that again, she said quietly. He looked at her directly. Julian Harcourt, the man whose name is on 3 hospital wings, was afraid of you. So he spent 4 years making you afraid of yourself instead. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Then, show me the grip break again, she said. The one from the wrist. He stood up. Gladly. The dismantling of Julian Harcourt took 11 days. Ethan sat Maya across the table from the documents on a Tuesday evening and walked her through every number. He did not soften it. She didn't ask him to. She turned each page with steady hands, reading the architecture of her own dispossession. The inheritance her parents left her, redirected piece by piece while Julian wore his philanthropist's smile to hospital galas. By the final page, her face had passed through something, a long, quiet reckoning, and come out the other side not devastated. Resolved. His broke, she said. He's been broke for 2 years, Ethan said. You were the flaw beneath everything he built. She looked at the last document. And now, he said, the flaw is gone. He leaned forward slightly. And he doesn't know yet that we're already standing at the elevator. Something dangerous moved through her eyes. Something that had been sealed behind for years of yes, Julian cracked open, not fragile. Sharp. Tell me what I need to do, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had come to his house broken and was sitting in his kitchen now like someone who had quietly, methodically, rebuilt herself room by room. I was going to handle it, he said. I know. She held his gaze. Tell me anyway. He told her. Julian chose the airfield outside Trenton, because men like Julian chose large, empty spaces for their final gestures. Rooms that made them feel significant. What Julian had not planned for was Maya. Ethan's team took the perimeter. Theo had Julian's men before they reached the east door. The night was cold and flat, airfield lights throwing long shadows across the concrete apron. Inside the hangar, Maya was already there. Julian had found the window in the security rotation. What he hadn't known was that Ethan had known about the window for 36 hours, and had told Maya it existed. I want to end it, she'd said across the kitchen table, her eyes clear and sharp as cut glass. Not have it ended for me. I want to be there. He'd taken 20 seconds to answer. Then, I'll be right behind you. Now she stood 10 feet from Julian in the center of the hangar. Spine straight. Chin level. Arms at her sides. Julian was talking. He was always talking. You don't have anywhere to go, he said. That voice she'd been afraid of for 4 years. Pleasant. Reasonable. The voice of a man who considered himself the last rational person in any room. Come back. We can fix this. I'll. Stop. Her voice didn't waver. Not even slightly. You spent 4 years teaching me that my silence kept me safe. She raised her phone slowly. You forgot to teach me what happens when I stop being silent. Julian's face shifted. It's already sent, she said. Your accounts. Your NDAs. The transfers from my trust. Every shell company. Every redirected wire. The federal investigators who've been building a case for 22 months received it 40 minutes ago. She paused. And the post. For the first time in 4 years, Julian Harcourt had nothing to say. That was when Ethan came through the north door. He crossed the hangar without rushing. Julian turned, raising his weapon, and stopped. Because behind him, 3 of Ethan's men were positioned with the patience of absolute certainty. Julian's pleasant face did something permanent and irreversible. It's over, Julian, Ethan said quietly. And it was. Spring came to the estate in pieces. First the tree line. Then the lawn. Then the light that reached the east wing windows by 6 in the morning and lay across the floor in long, unhurried rectangles. Maya stood on the balcony with her coffee. Her own clothes. Her own choice. A soft cream shirt that asked nothing of her and announced nothing except that she had chosen it. Her hair was loose. The fatigue that had lived behind her eyes for 4 years had been replaced by something quieter and more permanent. The hard-won composure of a woman who had stopped surviving and started living. Ethan came to stand beside her. She handed him his coffee without looking. Black. No sugar. She'd never needed to ask again. The federal case goes to the grand jury next month, he said. I know. I read the briefing. Your inheritance recovery. I have a meeting with the attorneys Wednesday. She glanced sideways. I handle my own calendar now. I know you do. The way he said it, not adjusting, not surprised, just acknowledging, made her turn to look at him properly. He was looking at her the way he had across that auction room. Not past her. Not through her. At her. What? She said. Nothing. He stopped. Ethan Voss was not a man who ran out of words. He rationed them. The ones he was reaching for now were clearly costing him something. At that dinner. The first night. You swallowed a napkin to protect a phone number. He shook his head slightly. After everything he'd done. Everything he'd taken. You were still trying. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned back to the morning. The tree line. The light laying itself across the lawn without asking permission. So were you, she said quietly. You just didn't know it yet. His hand found hers on the railing. Not careful. Not asking permission. The easy, unremarkable certainty of a man who had decided to stop building walls and start building something else entirely. They stood while the morning settled around them. 2 people who had come through the dark from entirely different directions and arrived, somehow, at the same place. Not protector and rescued. Not sword and wound. Partners. Equals. Solid ground. The light moved across the balcony. And found them both. If you made it this far, you already know this story has more to tell. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one.